couple other minor issues, water supply issues for the rural communities, the adoption of the International Residential Code, smoke alarm use, maintenance, and testing. The fire zone concept for the Mall of America has been tabled. It's awaiting sponsorship. So if anyone would like to sponsor it or knows of someone with dollars to put together a business plan and then develop the idea, Scott says $7,000 to $10,000. Let Scott know. So I pass that out to you. The next governance council meeting is January 23rd, but the executive committee will meet in December or early January. And again, if any of you have any ideas, thoughts, comments, or whatever, certainly get a hold of Scott at Futrell Fire. So, right on time, our speaker, who did a great job of introducing himself, Mr. Tom Lynch, with the DNR Division of Forestry. Tom is a seasonal firefighter for the DNR Forestry Division. He's also a volunteer on the Gunflint Fire with the Gunflint Fire Department. And Tom was instrumental during the initial attack on the Ham Lake fire, and is quite active in protecting structures from the fire and also directing other firefighters during those hours when the fire was quite engaged up there. So let's have a warm welcome for Mr. Tom Lynch.
I have a recommendation. How about a 5-minute break for you guys to take care of any issues, and we'll get our PowerPoint up running if that works for you guys.
Super.
You have it set up on a PowerPoint show?
Yeah, just on the PowerPoint.
Okay, this is it for 2007. Our next meeting will be in January. Encourage you all watch your emails. We'll get the information out as soon as we know what it is. Thank you.
We'd be happy to hear it and discuss it. They did change kind of the scope of the document to include power supplies and power arrangements. Now maybe Dave can address that a little bit more. In the past it's always been kind of a gray issue. Is it National Electric Code or is it NFPA 20? And he runs into those issues more than I do, being the fire patrol rep. So maybe you should speak to that a little bit, Dave.
Well, the ongoing issue has always been that, and I'm sure it'll continue, is that the electrical inspectors say that they can't enforce 20. It's not part of the National Electric Code. So they developed years back Section 695, which covered fire pump control, or fire pumps. Then became a confusion layer in there about because there's things in 695 about disconnects and things, and the inspectors that weren't aware of what's going on started saying that pertains to what's inside the fire pump controller. And that was not true. It was only pertaining to what may be installed ahead of the controller. So what 20's done is they've brought in a lot of the stuff out of 695 into 20. And they haven't taken it out of 695. It's just they brought it in so that the design people hopefully will become more aware of what the electrical requirements side is. Because it's always been a coordination effort when you get into the design firms. It's been, this is mechanical's territory, and for some reason they don't talk a lot to electrical. They tell them, hey, I got this horsepower motor and I got this voltage, and electrical goes on their way. And they don't necessarily coordinate it properly. And so this is an attempt at NFPA to try to get some of that coordination work done, I think.
Well, I think that'll be should be a positive.
I think it's going to be a real positive thing. I mean, a couple of years back, we ran into one real poignant deal about power supplies up in northern Minnesota, way up by the Canadian border. This company built a small manufacturing plant, pharmaceutical company, and they put fire protection in it. And when it was all ready to start up, they were like, well, how are we going to run it? And they said, well, we're going to run it off the standby generator set. And I went, well, that doesn't meet code. The code says it needs to be a continuous power supply. And so we had this argument back and forth, and he says, no, we're gonna do it our way, and I said, fine. I said, you do what you want, but I said, it's not for code. And the local inspector up there in a small town didn't say anything. Well, today, now in the new 20, it says that that's not acceptable. You know, it's finally in there that says standby power supply is not an acceptable power source for a fire department. It is if it's an alternate to a continuum, but not as a sole source.
They did have a number of definitions that were either added or changed in there. And one of them is this brake tank, which is like an intermediate tank between a city water supply and the fire pump. And I'm not that familiar with these things, and Dave and I kind of debated how much we bring this up. We don't even know what we're talking about on this thing. I've never seen one installed, and Ed said he had a little bit of, because we asked him about it before the meeting. And I don't know, does anybody else have any experience with installing a brake tank before a fire pump? It's,
I think this is a new concept.
could be, and
And Ed may be right, this may prove to be very interesting in a lot of situations.
I just, basically, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
The comment basically is that I attended the seminar at the Dallas conference of the AFSA, and the gentleman from the NFPA on that committee brought up the point of the brake tank. Now, this particular code, and I'm not going to steal any thunder from you, so I'm not going to go into any detail, but this code basically allows you to flow city water into the tank on one side while taking suction with your pump from the other side, so you don't get into your churn issue. When you're just churning, you don't go over 175 psi, and that's what the brake tank is all about. It's quite elaborately described in this new code book. It's quite interesting. I don't know of anybody that I know of that has installed it, but when you look at the concept and the drawings, it certainly makes some sense, particularly in light of some of the problems that we've been having lately with no relief valve on an electrical pump.
This was another definition that wasn't in the code book before, that I don't think we saw in there. Which is describing what a fire pump alarm is. It's a supervisory signal requiring immediate action. And I think the point here, at least how we interpret it was, it's not a fire alarm where, you've got, it's not required to have trucks responding to a fire pump alarm. I know some cities do require that.
Well, it seems like over the last year, we've seen many more alarm companies programming their panels to be strobe and horn responses to a pump running alarm. And I just did a startup not too long ago up in Staples at the new hospital there, and that's how it had been programmed. And I went, now wait a minute, let's think about this. You really want to evacuate all the patients out of this building if the pump starts because the jockey pump didn't run? I said, I just don't think this makes a lot of sense. And they sat there and they agreed, so they were going to reprogram that one. But I said, well, and I tried to find out how it got that way, and the alarm company said, well, that's what they were doing that to all their systems now. And so it's something we're going to have to watch for as we go along. I know there are a couple of jurisdictions, Rochester's one of them, where they want to roll a truck if the pump runs. And their thought was, Ross Parker's thought was, is that if that happens, it's because he wants to roll a truck and not bank on the flow switch working. And I did talk to one of the fitters, inspectors here this summer, and he said he was in a building, didn't have a fire pump, but he was in a building, had 3 zones, 3 separate flow switches, and none of the flow switches activated. So, there may be reason to do that, but I question it. If we want to do it, I don't know.
There was a flow and no flow switches work?
When they tested them, none of the flow switches worked.
That's a maintenance issue though, that's not a design.
It is a maintenance issue, I agree with you.
And it's always been my opinion to, if I'm asked, is that, the fire pump running should not be taken over to fire alarm.
But the way the people like Ross have said, it's like belt and suspenders. life safety equipment, do you want the belt, or do you want the belt and the suspender? And I don't think there's a good answer for that. I think it's just a personal preference.
Well, I think it's important that 20 finally came out and gave direction, as you were talking about, as to how the panel, the alarm guys program those signals, because there hasn't been any definition at all.
Right.
And years ago, they were programmed as troubles, which they shouldn't have been. And then they came up with supervisory signals.
Right.
But you still had alarm signals, and there was a lot of unclear direction on how to do it, so that's good.
They actually define what a high-rise building is in NFPA 20, I mean, there's nothing new here, I don't think, but this definition had not been in NFPA 20 before. And here's what Dave was talking about a little bit earlier, is they define the power.
Yep.
Power supply, on-site production facility. So you are going to have your own power generation, it has to be constantly running, as opposed to a standby system that may not be constantly running. And here they got a definition for all of us in here. Qualified person. Not quite sure why they needed to put that in there, but that was they added that definition to NFPA 20.
I think it has to do with the thing that they threw in the annex about parts that get replaced and stuff. I think we've all had issues with standard electrical contractors or repair people getting in there to repair stuff and making a mess of stuff. So I think that's where that qualified person comes from.
They also define what a circulation relief valve is. And that's, we call it a casing relief valve or circulation relief valve. It's a little 3/4 inch valve typically that's on a fire pump that discharges water, enough water to keep the pump from overheating when there's no flow in the system.
It's also called, later on in part of 20, it's also called an automatic relief valve. And I sent a note off to NFPA, I said, what's that? And they said, yeah, you're right, it's used interchangeably, but
And these are just some general requirements, I think, that they tried to clarify in there. And I think it was actually in there, just not stated as plainly as this, that a pump shall not be equipped with more than one driver. I never knew of anybody that tried to do that.
well, there were some, back in the 60s and 70s, there was some dual engine diesel electric, there's one downtown, North Shore building.
Where you have a diesel engine on one end of the pump. Here.
I think that one was.
Basically, they're talking about what Ed was talking about before, the freight tank, is that you cannot use a pressure relief valve as a means to deal with the requirements of the lower paragraph there.
Might be a new paragraph just because they moved it in the lower, but
And the other thing that they talk about there is, I think, is they added, might be, is that the pressure regulating device. I think that part of it's new. And so that was kind of the little avenue we had, I think, before, was that if you could couldn't put a relief valve in there, but you could maybe put a regulating valve in to keep the pressure lower in the system. And they don't allow you to do that in the fire pump discharge piping. That's the piping from the discharge flange to the control valve. That's the way I interpret that. I don't know if anybody else sees that differently or not.
But Mark, you're basically still allowed to put a suction control valve, is it not?
yes.
Right.
Same thing.
Well,
Wait.
no,